All right, y'all, I'm back. I had to come right back outside, you know what I'm saying, to finish this. My phone had cut off or whatnot. So I'm back in the car. I was going to finish this in the bathroom, but Alfred, I'm going to continue the way that I was already doing it. I left off talking about when they left out and they was on their way to France. So let me see. They left February 13th. And 6 days into their journey on the 19th, this is 1778, that's when they seen 3 British ships in the horizon. And the ships chased them for about like 2 nights, and then they finally lost the ship or whatnot. That very night, as far as the book, the author was saying, like, as far as like John Adams, he fell asleep and then he was woke immediately. He heard a loud ass bang. So he thought it was one of those British ships that they had lost that was firing at him or whatnot. So it shook his ass up or whatever. And in the moment, he thought about like what would happen. Like I'm not going to say he contemplated suicide, but he was extremely concerned. Some of the things that he considered was what would happen if he had got caught by the British, if he didn't get killed immediately. And as far as like his son Quincy, what would be his fate? He'll be like, forced into the British Navy or something, performing some type of slave like work. You know what I'm saying? So, once he realized it was just a storm, he fell asleep or whatnot. So then the storm continued for about 3 days or whatnot. By the end of the storm, 3 people on the ship had got struck by lightning. And they were saying like one of the guys had died or whatever, and he died from pain, from his injuries. They were saying he was in excruciating pain or whatnot. And then like shortly after that, some little boy, I believe his name was Jesse Dean. Some little boy had walked up with a letter in his hand, and pretty much the letter was for John Adams. The boy's father, his name was Silas Dean, and he also had an uncle by the name of Barnabas. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was Barnabas, his uncle, that wrote the letter asking for John Adams to take in his son. Now, as far as this part in the book, that's when they went into like, I ain't gonna say the history, but they was pretty much just talking about the context, the Puritan experience and Quakers and all these different people, and how their experiences brought them together or whatnot. And during this time, that was almost like the hospitality of people of such. You know what I'm saying? So he went ahead and took the boy in, and he agreed. As far as like what happened immediately after that, it was another guy. Now, this is an older fella. Now, going back to the boy, that's what I forgot to mention, his age. He was only like a year older than John Quincy Adams at the time. So he was about, 11? Let me see, John Quincy Adams was born July of 1767. This is 68, probably the end of February by this point. It's still mid-February. So Quincy was 11. No, wait a minute. Yeah. Damn, I'm fucking tripping. I can't even recall the date. He was still 10. He was 10 years old going on. Wait a minute. No, he was 11. Anyway, the little boy, Jesse Dean, he was only like a year older than him or whatever. So John Quincy Adams kept them together, and he had people on the ship look after them and watch them. Like, it was another guy who was supposed to be like the ship's doctor, and his name was Nicholas Noel. So John Adams had the boys placed with him, and he made sure like that guy kind of like, not continue but guided over the education of Quincy. In the meanwhile, like I say, he was still trying to keep his son's mind sharp or whatever. So he didn't want his son wasting too much idle time. You know what I'm saying? He still made time for John Quincy Adams to study, etc. So anyway, later, like immediately after that, another guy had walked up. Now, his name was William Vernon. Now, he was a youngin', but he was 18 years old. He also had a letter. And basically, based on what the letter read, his guardians wanted John Adams to take him in and bring him to somebody that could teach him business or something like that, either at Nantes or Bordeaux in France, where they were heading. And it was also like a bag with some money up in there. I think like 100 pounds of silver. Now, if I'm incorrect, the 100 pounds of silver may have been from Barnabas, but I think it was for William Vernon, for John Adams to take him to his destination or whatnot. But anyway, that's what happened, whatever. So they finally reached Paris. That was late March, and a pilot had got on the ship. This was before they landed. A pilot had got on the ship and explained to everybody that France had officially declared war on Britain. Now, one fact that I forgot to mention in the last one that just popped up in my mind when I was trying to recall the exact day or date when the French government recognized the United States as a sovereign nation. Come to think about it, it was December of 1777. And that's right after the Battle of Saratoga that took place or ended in October of that year. So that was the year. So anyway, they got to France or whatnot. Finally, they made it to Paris. As far as like Thomas Jefferson that was there, he had like, they call it a chate. And I might not be pronouncing that word correctly, but it's spelled Chateau, I believe. And there was an apartment that John Adams wanted to rent. But because Thomas Jefferson owned the chate, he went ahead and let him stay there for free or whatever. So they working and whatnot, and like I say, his mission was to trying to get finance for the United States. But going back to the book, as far as like what they was mentioning, you know, John Adams started complaining about Thomas Jefferson. He was saying like he was writing to the Congress or whatnot, and he was saying that Thomas Jefferson was kind of like remissful, I guess you could say, and he opposed as a philosophy or this or that, but he was really not doing what he was supposed to do. And it upset John Adams because he felt like he had to take up the slack. You know what I mean? Do all the extra work and try to acquire intel and this or that. And this is a new position, you know what I mean, to himself. So he got irritated, and he was asking the Congress to recall him back, that he couldn't get no work done or whatnot. And eventually that's what they did. They had disbanded the envoy, but it took a little while. So like 11 months after that point, that's when he decided to come back to America. So this is March. The only thing is, because of this war that was going on between the French and the British also at the same time, of course, with the Americans, you know, the ships got postponed, because the first ship that he arrived on was the Boston. The one that he tried to get on that he was supposed to ride back to America, it was called, not the Sensible, that's the final one that they got. It was the Alliance or whatnot. You know, they ended up canceling it. And then what, in April, I believe, let me see. Yeah, sometime in April, I believe the ship, they got another opportunity to go back, and it was the same ship as far as the Alliance. But he was saying like it had also got canceled because the French government decided to give that ship to, what was his name? I think John Paul Jones at the time. But eventually they finally got the chance to board, and that was in June. Now, during that time, that's when they just decided to spend all their time. I'm talking about like just before they boarded the ship, which was the Sensible, because they boarded it in Lorient. They didn't leave from Paris. They left from Lorient, France. But as far as like just before that, you know, during that little interval of time, you know, he went ahead and explored, you know, went to dinners and museums and things like that. So as far as like June of 1778, that's when they finally left. And when they arrived back to America, it was in not October. It was in August. Now, shortly after that, John Adams got asked to write a state constitution, and it was for the Massachusetts Constitution. Now, Prior to that, I want to say about 3 years before that, sometime in 1776, as far as like North Carolina, you know, like it was an essay that John Adams had wrote, and it was called Thoughts on Government. And it was basically just like a summation of a Bill of Rights, but not just a summation, but arguing why it makes sense. So a lot of the principles that he brought up, like he was talking about, like the way that the government is set up now and how governments prior to the United States had been set up. Like you got the checks and balances, you got the bicameral, you know what I mean? You got the legislative, you got the executive, and you got the judicial branch. Regardless of what fucking names you want to throw it under, whatever synonymous terms in other places. That's pretty much what he was talking about and expressing like the nature of liberty as it relates to the human being and how government bodies should basically not only protect it, but provide enough flexibility to where an individual could come up, you know what I mean, without being hindered. That's basically like the summation of his essay. And he had first wrote for the North Carolina state government, I believe. But as far as going back to, when he got back to America in August, that's what he was asked to do. He was asked to draft like a Massachusetts state constitution or whatnot. But he drew from those essays that he wrote. Or that essay that he wrote called Thoughts on Government. Shortly after that, that's when he was appointed again to go back to Europe. But this time, he wouldn't be a part of an envoy. He'll be like a actual minister, a plenipotentiary minister. So that's like an ambassador, basically. You know what I'm saying? So he wouldn't have to rely on somebody else or other fucking ministers or delegates, you know what I'm saying, of lesser rankings or whatnot. Because like the first time he went, he had to work with Thomas Jefferson, and being that Thomas Jefferson had already, like he was already there and he was more experienced in Paris, he kind of, he had to rely on him a lot. This time he didn't have to do that. So he agreed to go back. They left in, I think it was November when he agreed to go back. So the ship finally left, and then they made it to Paris in 1776, early 1776. The only thing is, like, okay, it was a rough job. I'm trying to decide, should I go into like the, how when they first pulled up into France or whatnot, they stopped at Faro, and then from Faro, they decided to cross through the Pyrenees Mountains because of the weather or whatnot. The Pyrenees Mountains because of the weather. So when they stopped at Faro, they went from Faro. Eventually, they made it to, I think the place is called Corona. And I believe that's how you say it, Corona. And then from Corona, they finally made it to Bilbao. When they made it to Bilbao, then from that location, they crossed the Pyrenees Mountains. And it took them about 2 weeks to do that, I believe. And then from that point, they finally made it all the way to Paris. And they took a guy by the name of Joseph Gordoki with them. I just didn't want to describe that part. But anyway, they finally get to Paris or whatnot. He had dealt with similar frustration, not as far as circumstances, but just on a practical basis. He really couldn't get no work done. Now, as far as like the, I believe he was a foreign minister. His name was, it was something Vergonese. And it'll come to my mind later, but as far as like this guy, after John Adams realized he couldn't get no work done, he tried to get in contact with him. And, the guy kept sending him around. As far as the book, when they was describing what was going on, they kept saying like John Adams, every time he'll try to get work done and he'll get in contact with these officials, they'll send him through what they call diplomatic niceties. So I'm not going to say it's a filibuster, but it just comes off like, basically, they saying he was being sent in circles. And as far as the author of the book, he gave his suggestion. He said, like, come to find out, what really was going on at the time is that France wasn't really trying to assist the United States in a moral sense. From their point of view, it was more like a strategic move. In other words, the author of the book was saying like they just wanted to prolong the war between the Americans and the British in order to weaken their military. That's what the author was saying. But as far as like what's going on through the lens of John Adams at the time, he didn't want to waste his fucking time and just remain there and not do nothing. So he decided to travel farther and go to Amsterdam, go to Holland for the same aim, basically try to get funds to help support the United States, as well as eventually negotiating the trade agreement and all that type of stuff. So that's where he went to. So he ended up going to Holland, him and John Quincy. Now, by the time he gets to Holland, of course, he met and mingled with people and stuff like that. And there was a university called Leiden. But, I forget to mention, right before he left, he did leave, he took the boys with him. He took the boys with him, and in Amsterdam, as far as like the universities, it's a place called Leiden. It's not located in Amsterdam, of course, but they had a university called Leiden University. And this guy by the name of John Thaxter, if not Thomas Thaxter, he enrolled in the university, and he went ahead and took John Quincy Adams with him. Even though John Quincy Adams didn't they didn't enlist. Actually, wait a minute. Yeah, he took them to the school with him, and I do believe that not John Adams, but John Quincy did become a student there eventually still. If he did not become a student there, he still was being tutored by Thaxter at the same time. Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? It's a professor that worked for the university. He was a professor. He was a professor of history or something like that. And his name was Jean Luzac. And Jean Luzac ended up getting very impressed with Quincy's intelligence. And because he was so impressed with that, he developed the relationship with John Adams. And because of this, Jean Luzac, for example, was like a prominent figure, by the way. And he had a lot of pull. So because of this relationship between John Adams and Jean Luzac, it facilitated John Adams being able to get more funds for the United States, because this guy Luzac ended up becoming almost like a spokesperson for that. So like shortly during that time period, that's when another guy named Francis Dana was appointed to be a minister to the Russian court at the time. And so he decided to take John Adams' son Quincy with him, because Quincy at that point had learned to speak French fluently, even though it's freaking, because, actually like not just French, because, up until this point he was studying different languages. Like even before they first went to Europe, John Adams had him reading and studying Greek, for example, Greek and Latin. You know what I mean? But as far as like French, by this point, John Quincy Adams had learned to speak it fluently. And based on the book, during that time period, French was almost like the base language for diplomacy. You know what I mean? Like regardless of what country you came from in Europe, if you were of the elite, at least, some type of nobility, you knew how to speak French fluently. So you could be somebody from Sweden and you'll be interacting with somebody from fucking Spain or something, and the neutral language between both parties was French. So therefore, if you didn't know Spanish or you didn't know Swedish, you know what I mean, you were still good. Francis Dana was not efficient enough in that language, so he chose to bring John Quincy Adams with him, which turned out to be a little mistake or whatnot, because when they finally left, they went to Russia. Now, as far as like in Russia, even though like okay, like if you think about it, you got Amsterdam, right? You got John Adams doing his thing. You still got Jean Luzac who's advocating for him. So he's making some type of progress. I'm going to get to that in a second. As far as on the opposite side of Europe, damn near, and Russia, by the time they get to Russia, Francis Dana couldn't make any type of progress whatsoever. Like the building that it was I forget the fucking name of the building, you know what I mean? But it was for diplomacy or whatnot. And he couldn't even get entry into the building. I'm talking about literally, not just like you getting in the building, but nobody won't fuck with you because they're not respecting your credentials. I'm talking about literally he could not get past what they call the sentries, the guards or whatnot. And he complained about this and he found out why. Because he tried to get in contact once again with one of the French ministers. And come to find out, the guy, and I still can't recall his freaking name, and I almost just did. He had gave an order to the rest of his rank and file ministers to not assist the Americans or, to not assist the Americans. The reason why is because it would have came off as an embarrassment. They didn't like the fact that Francis Dana, given his title, had a child with him as his like secretary and interpreter. So they felt like it was a bad look. It came off as tactful. So as far as like those two, they ended up staying in Russia, and it was in a stalemate mode pretty much. They couldn't get anything done. So instead of just like, only just going out partying and doing this and that, because it was super cold in Russia as well. They were saying like, luckily they had like a little bookshop or something. And Francis Dana and John Quincy Adams pretty much just started purchasing all kinds of books and just going through them shit with absolute concentration. You know what I'm saying? In the midst of being bored in the cold ass fucking winter, because John Quincy Adams had wrote in his diary that by like February, I want to say, the fucking temperature dropped like negative 20 degrees at least. You know what I'm saying? But like a couple of months after that, their spirits got somewhat uplifted because, let me see, I think in April, that's when, in April of 1781, the Dutch accepted the credentials of John Adams. So as far as like what I was saying prior, before my phone cut off, when I was talking about like the Dutch recognition of the Americans, like remember I was saying like how, what was it, in November of 1776, how they saluted the Grand Union flag at the time, and the British got offended because they took it as like a sign of recognition. But, the Americans, because on the scene, as far as like, the most powerful nations on the scene, you had the British, then you had the French, and then you had the Russians. And then everything else fell in line from that point. As far as on the scene, being that the British, considered the Americans to be rebels, anybody else dealing with them or trading with them as if they were a legitimate entity at that time, that was deemed something that you shouldn't do pretty much. You know what I mean? So as far as like them saluting the flag, that was the first sign of recognition. But formally on paper, April of 1781 is when they accepted his credentials, thus officially recognizing the United States as a sovereign nation. By the time his son Quincy and Francis Dana heard about this, they felt like, okay, cool. They got a little happy because in their minds, now the Russians will have no choice but to, recognize them or whatever. But it turned out, that still, they couldn't make any progress. Wait a minute. I know what I'm messing up at. I'm messing up at the dates. Yeah. When the Dutch government accepted John Quincy Adams' father's signature, they were still, as far as John Quincy Adams and Francis Dana, they were still in Amsterdam. Well, not Amsterdam, but, in the Netherlands or whatnot. Because remember, at this point, John Quincy, Thaxter, for example, he was still attending the University of Leiden. Okay, so that's April when that happened. Later on after that, shortly after that, around June or something like that, that's when he went to Russia. Now, February of 1782 is when John Quincy Adams wrote in his diary complaining about the weather and saying it was like, it got to a point where it's like 20 degrees below freezing or below zero or whatever. So then, like, shortly after that point, months later, around June or something like that. Well, actually, before June, as he's communicating back and forth to his father, they throwing little innocent insults at each other's like, John Adams was saying, like, hopefully you found some companions, somebody like you or similar to you, or at least around your age, making fun of him for being lonely, basically. And then in response, Quincy, in writing his letters, decided to write in French. You know what I mean? No, it wasn't French. It was another language that he decided. I think it was German that he wrote to his father, and just fucking with him, going back and forth or whatnot. But anyway, during that whole little conversation, he was telling his father that he was bored. So that's when his father asked him to come back to Amsterdam, in which he eventually did. But before I do that, I want to go back to something. I want to go back to the victory that occurred in October of 1781. Now, that's the date as far as like the Battle of Yorktown that happened in America, the siege of Yorktown. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because, again, going back to April, that's also the same fucking, let me see, I think that's the same month that the British attacked the island of St. Eustatius. I believe the date for that is also either the 17th or the 19th, but that happened in April, right? Now, as far as that whole little circumstance, the British had attacked many of their territories just before they got to Eustatius, like they were saying, like the island of, what was it, Sri Lanka, some of their islands within the Indian Ocean. And then they went as far as West Africa and they seized all forts belonging to the Netherlands. Then the last stop was St. Eustatius. Now, this portion right here is where I got from the, Wikipedia when I looked it up. And when they got to St. Eustatius, they defeated them and forced them to surrender. And when they occupied the island, they took all their cash, crops, whatever type of goods that they had. And then as far as like the admiral general, or like the Navy commander at the time, his name was George Rodney. He was the one that was given credit for that. The only thing is, as far as like this article, as far as like the Dutch involvement in the American Revolution, they were saying that may have made it easier for the Americans to win that particular battle, as far as like the siege of Yorktown, because let me see, the British commander at the time, his name was Charles, because he got two names, that's why it's hard, I don't want to mess it up, and I'm making sure I don't straw point the book, but his name was Charles Cornwallis. His nickname is Earl Cornwallis. As far as like what took place on the island of St. Eustatius, because there was so much resources available, they were saying like by the time you got to October, as far as the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia, it made it easier for the French to arrive to assist the Americans, because a lot of their naval resources had been utilized. Again, going back months before that to St. Eustatius. But as far as like Charles Cornwallis, another thing that's relevant and is interesting about this and that guy is it brings it to mind a slave. His name was James Armistead. Now, he's also connected to another very fucking popular French commander or general. His name is Marquis De Lafayette. The reason why this is interesting and important is because Marquis de Lafayette also fought at the Battle of Yorktown or whatnot. So, as far as James Armistead, he was a slave at the time, right? Now, the book mentioned Marquis de Lafayette quite a few times, by the way, included during this battle, but they do not mention James Armistead. So when I was reading the book and I got to this portion, it was interesting to me. I'm like, okay, this is the perfect opportunity to go ahead and incorporate this guy. I first heard about James Armistead in 2015 when I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota for a little second or whatnot. And when I go to their library on Hennepin, the Hennepin Library, I get on Facebook and, this is like in between. Like I go to the library, sit down in a room or at a table and, go through books or whatnot. And then sometimes I get on the computer and then I get on Facebook. And there was a Facebook page at the time that would post things sometimes relating to Black history. And I checked it out and I looked up this guy and I was fucking impressed. I thought he was an interesting guy and I had never heard about him before. So as far as like reading this book, I decided like, let me go ahead and include him as like a addendum. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a relevance to it. I'm going back to this battle of Yorktown. Now, as far as like James Armistead, I believe he was born around 1748, about 1748. His slave master, his name was William Armistead. Hold on, let me relight my cigarette. It's dark. And I'm not using notes, you know what I'm saying? When I do these vlogs, I do not fucking use notes. I don't believe in that. But at the same time, I don't want to be labor when I'm doing. I can't find my lighter, so I'm just going to keep on talking while I look for the lighter. But it's dark in here anyway, so you can't see the phone. You can't see everything chaotic on the screen. But as far as James Armistead, he was born in 1748. Slave master, his name was William Armistead. And by the time this American Revolution popped off, they had a law out there in Virginia. They had it to where like, okay, if you are a slave and you fight in the American War, the American Revolutionary War, in the place of your slave master as a soldier, then you would be guaranteed your freedom. So James Armistead volunteered. When he enlisted, he got placed into the ranks, like, basically under the command of not an American general, but Marquis De Lafayette. And George Washington had also found, well, I'll get to that in a second. Marquis de Lafayette, right? Marquis de Lafayette decided to use James Armistead as a spy. So he would have to come off as a runaway soldier, get to a British flank or whatnot, and then, gather up intelligence and then somehow communicate that to other people who were spies, white spies, by the way. You know what I mean? And that was his duty. So he was like a double agent, very, very risky, right? So the first assignment that he had, it was Benedict Arnold. Now, as far as like in New York, I want to say West Point, New York. There is a fortification there. Now, this goes to George Washington. Now, this portion right here, of course, like I say, it's not in the book, so I had to research this in addition. This is Wikipedia. As far as George Washington, he had placed a lot of trust in Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was stationed at this fort. As far as like James Armistead, he spied on him as well. Come to find out, Benedict Arnold was planning on relinquishing, and I don't even want to just say relinquishing, but basically just betraying Americans and letting the British, occupy the fort there in West Point, New York. And that is something that James Armistead had also communicated to the Americans, and they found out about it, and that's when they got fully, went to the side of the British. Shortly after that, as far as Virginia, that's when James Armistead was assigned to go spy on Charles Cornwallis. And the intelligence that he gathered from what was going on with him also assisted the Americans greatly in gaining that victory as far as like the siege of Yorktown. So you got two main factors basically is where I'm getting to. You got the Battle of St. Eustatius that happened that took place April 19th earlier that year. And then you got James Armistead, who played a vital role, who ended up getting the Americans a lot of good ass intelligence. So that was like the the relevancy of James Armistead as it relates to that. Now, as far as going back to John Quincy Adams and his father. Now, when as him and his father going back with these letters, he decided to rejoin his father in Amsterdam. So then he went. When he went to Amsterdam, that's when they eventually, that very fucking year, that's when they decided to leave or whatnot. Then let me see, I want to make sure I don't get the date wrong. So I believe they left, what was it? June? Sometime in June. Nah. He joined his father in Amsterdam. And by this time, it is 1782, right? Yeah, 1782. A year after that, and if I'm forgetting anything, I just go back to it later. But a year after that, 1883, is when his mother, Abigail, wrote to John Adams expressing how, she missed the family, that to the point where she had decided to move to Europe or whatnot. So she ended up moving out there. I think of like what was it? Was it because they signed a treaty in September 3rd of 1783. That was the treaty that they signed as far as like the peace treaty between the British and the Americans, because like the last major battle, which was the Battle of Yorktown, that was kind of like a defining battle at that point. So it led to this treaty. They signed it. I think his mother Abigail moved to Europe. She moved to Europe the next year in 1784. That's how that happened, because like after they signed the treaty as far as September 3rd, 1783, that was signed in France, because it was a big deal. They didn't want to sign the treaty on British soil. So, all representatives met in I think it was Paris. I know the name of the street was Rue Jacob or something like that, but it was definitely somewhere in France where they signed this treaty or whatnot. After they signed this treaty, based on the book, John Adams and his father would go back and forth between England, Holland, and was this Holland, England, and Paris. And because now the United States and the British were at peace, John Quincy Adams had the opportunity to, explore, like while he was in London, for example, he had visited the, what was it called? Westminster Abbey, or Abbey Westminster, or something like that. I don't know too much about this spot, but then he also visited the St. Paul Cathedral. And then in London is where he visited the Buckingham Palace. Now, it was another guy. His name was what was it? Benjamin something. Benjamin James, I believe. And he was an artist. He was a painter. Now, he was somebody that had already moved to, London, or moved to, I think it was London where he moved to, but he had did all this type of stuff before the whole revolution popped off. In fact, they were saying like King George III had took a great liking to him. But as far as that guy though, he's the person that, he took Quincy around and showed him like the different art galleries at Buckingham Palace. So then finally, the next year is when Abigail finally moved out there. And of course, they took her around. She mingled with people and all this type of stuff. I want to say the following year in 1785. Around mid 1785, sometime around that, that's when he decided to, go back to America and try to enroll in Harvard University and follow in the footsteps of his father before him, who had graduated in 1755. So that's exactly what he did. Now, this is interesting to me, right? So he moved back to America, right? When he went back to America, it had to be the exact day or dates, the month. I believe it was August of 1785. He met up with one of the presidents of Harvard University. At this point, I think it was still called Harvard College, but he met up with this guy. His name was Joseph Williard. It was another guy. His name was Ezra Stiles or whatnot. He actually met him first. But as far as like the day when he went to go take the exams, it was in August. So I believe August. Yeah, August. Anyway, so he met up with that guy or whatnot. Now, as far as the book, when Quincy met this guy, they had opposite airs about themselves. Like this guy, Joseph Williard, as far as his background, based on the book, they said that he came from a poor background. And if not both of his parents, one of his parents died. But he had like a little success story because even though he came from a poor background, he wasn't born into an elite. He went on to become a professor of mathematics, etc. A very sharp guy. Now, as far as like John Quincy Adams, the guy, Joseph Williard, didn't really like him too much. He felt like he was a little too happy. He didn't like his clothing. He felt like his clothing was a little too elegant. He just didn't like his whole style. He just didn't like his whole era. He didn't like his confidence because in the book they were saying like, the way that Joseph Williard, and it really is Joseph Willard, the way that he, perceived Quincy. Quincy had so much confidence about him. It's like the guy was looking at it like, how dare you speak on even terms with even eye contact with an adult. You know what I'm saying? Now they didn't say even eye contact. They were just talking about how the guy was irritated by the fact that, in Quincy's mind, like he didn't like his assurance, his self-assurance. You know what I'm saying? And they had two different traditions of coming up. As far as this guy Joseph, like they were saying he ran the university or the college like a military compound. Whenever a person would walk past him, regardless if you were a faculty member or a student, he required for them to take their hats off or whatnot. Now, before I go into the results of the exam, to Joseph Williard's credit somewhat, Quincy did kind of have a self-assured attitude a little bit, based on of his experiences in fucking Europe when he got to Harvard. He wasn't really impressed with a lot of things, like for the library, for example. They had a library, and it was the biggest library in the country, in the whole entire country at the time. And the amounts of books that they had were 12,000. They had 12,000 volumes of books. However, as far as like in France, this is what the book highlighted. Now, I don't recall, while reading about Quincy's first experiences in Europe, I don't recall them mentioning this library. But as far as this portion of the book, when they talk about like what was going on between Joseph Willard and Quincy wasn't impressed with that library because in France, or in Paris, actually, they had a library that had 1 million fucking books and 80,000 volumes. You know what I'm saying? So he was already used to that. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and mention this because I skipped it. When you think about like when he first went to Amsterdam with his father, right? After his father couldn't get, too much work done in France when he was being sent around. When he decided to go to Russia with Francis Dana, now this part right here is relevant, so I'm gonna go ahead and speak on it because it speaks to his experiences and like what he felt that moment in front of Joseph Williard. As far as like when Quincy decided to go to Russia or agreed to go to Russia with Francis Dana, they mentioned like the places that he stopped at on the way to Russia. So the first one was what? I think it was it Poland? Nah, it was Catholic Palatine. That's the name of the place. And as far as like Catholic Palatine. He was saying like they were like they didn't allow Protestants to own houses and stuff like that. And then he found that to be weird. And from Catholic Palatine, he ended up going to another place called Frankfurt or something like that. Now, as far as like this place, this is also in Germany. And they had like a Jewish population that lived there. About 600 Jewish families or whatnot. And as far as like the tradition of the place, like at nighttime, I want to say around 10 p.m. But at nighttime, like the city would be extremely quiet and they would close the gates. And on Sundays, that would be the operation for the whole entire day. So then from there, he went to Berlin. And he gave compliments about the city or whatnot. You know what I'm saying? He was somewhat impressed with Berlin. Then from Berlin, that's when he made it into Poland. Now, Poland, he was talking about like, you know, that's the first time that he came across slaves. Because even though his father, John Adams, was the second president of the United States, and he's also a forefather, and he made many contributions. I mean, so many that I can't even include them all in his blog unless I want to wait a whole nother week. You know, his father never owned slaves. Neither did his mother. So as far as in Poland, he was saying it's the first time he ever came across slaves, and it was that personal. And he called it abject slavery. He was saying they was living in the worst fucking conditions on farms, and you know, it like as far as the how they are, like the humanity of these slaves. He was saying like sometimes they'll be traded for an animal as low as a dog, you know what I mean? And then their owners had almost complete arbitration over them, to where like if they decided to kill one of their slaves, they'll pay a little penalty or whatnot, but that's about it. Just like a little trifling fine or something like that. You know what I'm saying? And they'll work all fucking day. Only thing is like they were allowed to buy their freedom if they, you know, earn enough money to do that. But as far as like what Quincy noticed, is that like the slave masters will make it to where they'll never get in a position to own that much money. You know what I'm saying? So that was his experiences there. And then that's when he went to Russia. Now, as far as like, I'm going to include this also, when he left Russia to go back to Amsterdam, you know what I mean? After not being able to get no work done, you know, that's when he went and took the long route, and he went through Sweden and then Germany or whatnot. Now, as far as like the Swedish women, you know what I'm saying? He was almost kind of like lustful of them. We talking about how good they look, how cultured they were, this and that. You know, he had a whole bunch of compliments about the Swedish or whatnot. The whole point in bringing it up is like, you know, even though he was a child when he first went to Europe, you know, by the time he goes to Harvard in August of 1785 to take this test, all of these various experiences along with what he witnessed informed his attitude. Because you got to keep in mind, like what I'm saying is like that quote that I fucking love from his mother, the whole thing about, you know, when you go out there and you experience stuff, you open up the heart to feed the mind's hunger for knowledge. So keep that in mind. That is something that she also instilled in him. Now you got these solid experiences, you know what I'm saying? And all this shit that he witnessed on top of the fact of him being in Paris and them having a fucking library with over a fucking million books. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm in the state of Illinois right now. I don't know one library in Illinois with 1 million books. And this is 2021. So that was fucking significant. So going back to Quincy and Joseph Williard, you know, he went ahead and took the exam, but it was verbal. You know, he just basically asked them some questions in Greek and Latin. And this part, I was like, wow. You know, Quincy answered his questions. And when he got done, the guy looked at him and he used the term skilled, you know, SCOWL. But he basically gave him a little facial expression. He was like, I'm sorry, you're ineligible. And Quincy stood there fucking shocked. You know what I'm saying? He was shocked because he considered like his family history. And then as far as like the elites of Boston, he was saying like, you know, in the book, they were saying like, you know, everybody that's worth something, especially in Boston or Massachusetts, they had Harvard education, a Harvard education for the most point. And if not a Harvard education, they had one from Cambridge. Not only that, you remember the guy that I was talking about before my phone cut off, Samuel Adams. Like that's another guy right there. Like he himself, his father's cousin, Samuel Adams, also had a Harvard education. You know what I'm saying? Along with his father. So that kind of brought down his self-esteem, and he just basically chalked it up to like Joseph Williard hating. But Joseph did tell him, he was like, okay, look, I'll tell you like this. You go ahead, you go find your tutor. You come back around March of next year. You take this test. If you pass it again, then you'll be considered a fucking junior the following month. So from that point, he'll graduate a year after that. You know what I'm saying? That was the plan. So after that, he went ahead, like I say, he lifted his head back up and shit. And then one of I think this guy was supposed to have been an uncle of his. His name was John Shaw. Now, this is somebody that, regularly prepped, and tutored people for Harvard. So he went ahead and studied with that guy or whatnot, and the guy was helping him mostly with his Greek and Latin or whatnot. So then by the time March come, John Quincy take the fucking test again. And the same person administered the test, Joseph. He passed. Based on the book, they said he tested him again on Greek, Latin, but also philosophy, mathematics, and something else. He passed some shits as flying colors. The guy was gentleman about it. He said, you're eligible or whatnot. And I want to say like the following year, he graduated in July of 1787. But as far as like, when he finally attended the fucking college or Harvard University, both of his younger brothers also attended. And I can't even. Thomas Boyston and his other brother, Charles Adams. You know what I'm saying? Charles Adams, I believe, was a freshman. And Thomas Boyston may have been a sophomore, or I think Thomas Boyston was a freshman and Charles Adams was the sophomore. Either way, they was attending the school still. So Quincy, after being admitted into the school, graduated just a fucking year later. Now, as far as this part, and also let me also add this too. Going back to the credit of Joseph. After John Quincy Adams graduated, he did write to his parents and he gave them a compliment. He said, I think he basically said he think he's going to have not just a bright future, but he's going to end up being a distinguished, individual in society, which turned out to be the case or whatnot. But anyway, he graduated July of 1787. Now, as far as like the context of the political field and what's going on at this point, and I'm gonna try to speed this up because I'm at 53 minutes. As far as like the political context is what's going on, you got the Shea Rebellion that's taking place, right? And this is in Massachusetts also. It started in 1786, and the guy, his name was Daniel Shays with an S, and he had been a war veteran. Now, they bring him up in the book and they kind of like briefly go over it, but I researched it and I researched it in addition, and they was pretty much saying like, he was a war veteran. He participated in every fucking major battle. He eventually got injured, but as far as like going back to the Battle of Concord and Lexington, and then you're going as far as Saratoga, and possibly I think he actually fought in the siege of Yorktown too. But he did end up getting injured. And he was a farmer for the most part. And they had an issue with taxes that was being left. Like they was getting, like I think they was being taxed on, I think they said it was like a tax on individuals and their goods or something like that. But then you had like a little financial crisis going on at the same time in Massachusetts where a lot of people were becoming bankrupt. And then you had like like he felt like judges in, I don't want to say prosecutors, but he felt like, as far as like the political system, he felt like it was a scam going on and everybody was colluding with each other, and the court system became obsolete in his eyes. So so as far as like Daniel Shays, he became vocal about that, and he created a movement or whatnot. So like early 1787. Now, John Quincy is still in school, so as far as like them marching across the state and shit, because they had marched in Worcester, something else, I believe Concord as well, and Cambridge. And they got as far as Springfield. Now, as far as when they got to Springfield, this is January of 1787. The government eventually, the state militia eventually, scared them off. It was about like 1,200 plus men at this point, and they was marching to an armory or whatever to collect weapons in protest. And they actually had it as their intent to build their movement big enough to actually overthrow the state of Massachusetts at the time. The federal government was limited, you could say. Like, they couldn't afford to send like a militia there, so the state militia, or they couldn't afford to send soldiers there or whatnot, so the state militia themselves, as well as private militias, finally took down these dissidents, you could say, and they scared them off. They fired cannonballs at them and shit like that. I don't think they really mentioned too many. I don't think, as far as like what I can recall, I don't think nobody really got killed, and if they did, the number wasn't significant enough for it to be highlighted, because I don't recall seeing an exact number or statistic. But they scared them off, and they chased a lot of these dissidents to their home. Daniel Shays eventually got caught, but this is the thing I think is cool about this part right here. Like, he got caught, and later on he was given like a pardon or clemency, and then eventually, he was still working. He was still a farmer. He ended up getting like a pension from the government. So his story turned out all right. And I'm not, I'm actually speak on this part. As far as like Daniel Shays, I'm not really too mad about him, because I think about that movie Glory. You know what I'm saying? And of course, the obvious, like, nigga, like, I applied myself. You know what I mean? I put myself on the line for this country as a patriot, especially at a time where, everything is not promulgated and codified and had been in existence for at least 20 years to where I feel safe doing this. You get what I'm saying? Like, in other words, you think about like the period of what was going on, all these people had to have a degree of bravery there, along with their passion, as far as them not liking the British because, they felt like they were like oppressive. You know what I'm saying? If you think about all these people, any one of them would have got caught back in the day, they would have got killed. Now, you're talking about a time where the revolution in America had just happened and ended 4 years prior. Because remember, this whole little movement with Daniel Shays started in 1786. So within a society that were recently considered rebellious by the most powerful fucking country on the planet at the time, Britain, and them defeating the British, a lot of luck, whatever. You know what I'm saying? A lot of serendipity, a lot of heart at the same time, whatever. Not as much luck as later on, the second time they, went to war with the British, the War of 1812. But domestically, for one to get so fed up and take up arms and try to overthrow a state within itself is like an extra, I look at it like, it's like an extra pinch of bravery. But as far as like what he was upset about, he had legitimate concerns. So again, I'm going to take his situation, and again, not trying to be racial, but I'm going to compare it to like the movie Glory. If you watch the movie Glory, you're not going to catch these scenes on YouTube, but if you get like a DVD and you look at the special features, they got a documentary portion, right? And they hit you with some hardcore facts. They was talking about like the black soldiers. Cause like when you watch the movie, and then, a little bit of what you learn, at least back in the day in history, it's a little different with the internet now. You know what I'm saying? It's no excuses to say like, they're not teaching us the right history. That's a whole different topic. But when you look at the movie Glory, I'm not even going to disrespect it and say that it was watered down. I'm just going to say it's a lot more that was not included in the movie. I'm not going to argue whether or not that was intentional. Fuck all that. It don't matter. But as far as like the documentary, they were saying like the soldiers, they didn't get the pay that they were promised because just before they enlisted in this regiment, you know what I'm saying? As far as during the American Civil War, they had flyers passed around, promoting this, like black soldiers, you'll get this type of pay. Da, 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 da. They didn't get that. And when they did get paid, their pay got cut. And then like the proper gear that they were supposed to wear, they wasn't given the proper gear. A lot of them went barefooted for a while. Even after the whole little battle occurred, I remember they was mentioning this. They was talking about like when they was marching back, in the United States, a lot of the people would spit on them. Like literally saliva, shit like that. As far as Daniel Shays, in the midst of the battles, he didn't get paid at all. As far as him getting that pension, that wasn't even until after the fact. Years later, after he got clemency and all that type of stuff. So I could understand his gripes, you could say. And I like to look at it and compare it to like the black soldiers, that were highlighted within the movie Glory. You know what I'm saying? And the 1860s. 1860s. In the 1860s and whatnot. I look at that as the same. So again, as far as like Daniel Shays, I feel like he had a lot of legitimacy, and I respect him for that, and I think he was righteous for that. The move that he made. In fact, they should kind of like highlight him a little bit more, because when you think about like the language in the United States, it is incumbent within the Constitution for a citizen or persons to not only enjoy their rights, but to protect their rights and ensure their rights, and if necessary, go out for their rights. Now, this is before the Constitution as we know it today was put together. Prior to that, it was the Articles of Confederation. So I respect him, and he should also probably be considered the forefather. Now, going deeper into his history, as far as like his racial outlook, I don't know. As far as what I read, Wikipedia didn't say anything about that. You know what I'm saying? But again, I would definitely consider him, just looking at it from like an objective lens, I would definitely consider him like a forefather. And I think it'd be interesting, like if anybody chose to do this, like take a John Brown and then compare like a John Brown to a Daniel Shays and write like a whole essay about it. But anyway, that's what happened with that, right? So John Quincy Adams experienced that. The next year in 1788, actually, after he graduated from Harvard University or college, that's when he decided to start studying for his bar exam. The next year after that, around 1788, is when his father, John Adams, and his mother, along with his sister, because his sister Nabby, or Abigail Jr., even though you can't call her Junior, but, her nickname is Nabby. His older sister Nabby had also moved to Europe with his mother. You know what I'm saying? When she went out there in 1784 or whatnot. And then by this point, she also had ended up getting married. But his father and his mother, they decided to return back home. So they came back in 1888. They were well received as well. And as far as like the book, they were saying like John Adams, he had a lot of offers for like public positions or whatnot, but the one that he had in mind, the only one that he was interested in, and he was vocal about it, is the vice presidency. So shortly after that, the next year, that's when George Washington became the first president of the United States, and Quincy's father, John Adams, became his vice president. You know what I'm saying? Because as far as like the Daniel Shays situation, based on Wikipedia also, they were saying like that's like one of the main catalysts for the Constitutional Convention that took place in 1787. You know what I'm saying? Because when you think about it, and this is what Wikipedia pointed out also, when they had difficulties initially trying to put down this rebellion, and one of the reasons they had difficulties is because the federal government wasn't able to, they couldn't afford to just send soldiers there at the time. So that was like one of the critiques of the Constitution or the Articles of Confederation at the time, that, it took too much power away from the federal government and gave it too much to the states, to the point where, like the federal government really couldn't tax people. You know what I'm saying? And pay for something like that, like a Daniel Shea situation, to where they'll have like, they'll have I was gonna say readily available, but they'll be able to afford to put down a rebellion quick if something like that happened, rather than just relying on the states to do it. You know what I'm saying? So that's like one of the reasons, and they modified the Constitution and gave the federal government, a little bit more powers or whatnot. So John Adams became the first president. This is in 1801. I was gonna say something, but I'm gonna wait to the end of this to say it, and hopefully I don't forget. As far as like, okay, 1801. I mean, not 1801, my bad. 1789. Like I said, I keep messing this up. I keep saying that. Shortly after that, I want to say, what year? August 9th of 1790. Is it 90 or is it 91? Possibly, I'm going to say 1790. August 9th of 1790. John Quincy Adams had passed his bar exam. And that's when he had opened up his business at the time. I'm trying to make sure, like I said, I do not want to mess up the book, but basically he had to open up a law firm, a law office or whatnot. He didn't really get too much business, and his father, he complained about that to his father or whatever. So his father kind of like, okay, well, to try to help his spirits out, he made him like power of attorney over their family businesses or something like that. And as far as like in Boston and Braintree, he had like property that he owned or something like that. Whatever that it was, his father gave him some type of like additional work to where he'll be able to bring in, some more income or whatnot. Then like shortly after that, let me see. Because this is like around the time, and I don't want to leave nothing out, but this is like around the time of the French Revolution, because the French Revolution had started in 1789. Now, this is when another guy that they bring up, his name was Vincent Ogay. He becomes relevant. They bring him up briefly in the book, but I'm going to touch on him as well. But I'm going to go ahead and start with the chronological order of this French Revolution. Okay, 1789. Now, as far as like the French government at the time, their government body was pretty much broken down into three main, not categories, but bodies of government, right? They call them estuaries. You got the first one. That represents like the clergy. So that's everything a part of royalty, right? And they had delegates to represent this group as well. The second one was the nobles. The third one was representative of the commoners, and then those who, basically, like, I don't want to say rich. You could say like the upper class from just the poor commoners, but still all pretty much classified within this third estuary, and they had delegates pertaining to them or whatnot. So you had issues going on at this time, because by 1789, as far as the third estuary, they had more representation because they had like twice as many delegates as the other groups. So May 5th, they were supposed to meet up to deal with some type of financial crisis. You know what I'm saying? But they really didn't get too much done. It became an issue as far as them having that many delegates or whatever. So the third estuary decided to, set up their own meetings. Now, from May 5th to May 27th, there's another guy by the name of Jacques Necker. He was like a financial advisor, right, to the king. He wasn't like he was a financial minister. And, he gave suggestions to the king to set up this royal meeting, you know what I mean, that would normally happen, include all three bodies of government. And what Jacques Necker had in mind was kind of like make little, to acquiesce a little bit to some of the concerns and worries of the estuary representing the commoners or whatnot. But, they had a difficult time communicating with these various bodies or whatnot. So By the 28th of May, that's when the third estuary decided to start their own meetings, right? So you got this friction going on. Barely a month later, the next month, on the 13th, they continue their meetings up until the 17th, right? June 17th. And then on that very day, that's when the third estuary changed their name to the General Assembly. So it's like going back into King Louis the 16th at the time. He basically set up his basically he had the royal meeting set up for like the 21st or whatnot, or was it the 23rd? I know like one of the places that they'll normally meet up as far as all these general assemblies, he had that place closed down. I almost called the name. It's called something ETAT or something like that. ETAT. I can't recall the exact name right now, but he had that place closed down or whatnot. And then on the 21st, basically, to make a long story short, the king finally addressed all of these assemblies, and they addressed them on the 27th of June. And it was, just like a normal meeting or whatever. The king got up there and said what he had to say, and then that was it. And when he got done speaking, it was completely silent. And everybody got up to leave except for the delegates of the third estuary, who is now called the General Assembly. So, another guy by the name of what's his name? Mirabe? I think that's how you say his name, Mirabe, because it's spelled Mirabeau. He got up and he just started venting or whatnot, talking about like we need to get stuff done. First, he mentioned about like the military presence that was there at the meeting, because his meeting took place. Being that the King Louis the 16th had closed down the place that they would normally meet at, they decided, as far as like the third estuary, to meet at the Church of St. Louis at the time. That's what it was called, the Church of St. Louis, the St. Louis Church. And so like, as far as like the military, they had a military presence there outside the building. And this guy Mirabai or Mirabu or Mirabu or Mirabu or Mirabe felt some type of way about it. And so he vocalized it or whatever. And then he also said that, nobody should leave unless we finally get a constitution written or whatnot. So the people agreed with him and they stayed. Now, as far as that actually wasn't the 27th. I believe that was the 23rd, but they stayed until the 27th. Now, as far as like the delegates with these three main government factions, a lot of them decided to side with the General Assembly. So you had like at least, they say you had some members of the clergy, and as far as like the nobles, you had about 47 of them. You know what I'm saying? And eventually, by the 27th, that's how they go. By the 27th, they said the king kind of gave in to some of their demands. So if I understanding this is when you had a separate split. Now, as far as the third estuary, at this point, this is representative of the delegates that they had, but also some of those that crossed over, such as some of the people of the clergy, as well as some of the nobles who now constituted 47. So that was like the beginning stages of that revolution as far as in France at the time. Now, the reason why that's important is because that's when this guy Vincent Ogé comes into play. Now, going back to the book, at this point in the book, as far as like the revolution of France, just a few more years later, that's when they mentioned Vincent Ogé. Actually, a couple of years later, because he actually got executed February 6th of 1792. You know what I'm saying? This is when things was getting worse in France. But the reason why he's relevant to 89 as well is because that's the year when his shit got sparked. Now, let me go back and let me speak on him real quick. Now, as far as Vincent Ogé, when I read about him in this book, I was like, wow. Now, was he a revolutionary? No, not really. Not really. No. In my opinion, I would say that he was more so like a reformist. You know what I mean? Like how some people make the distinction between Malcolm X as opposed to a Martin Luther King. By the way, as far as Martin Luther King and Vincent Ogay's philosophy, they're completely different. So I'm not comparing them in that sense. But if you're talking about like a reformer within an institution itself, rather than somebody that, completely changes that motherfucker or uprooted, I would definitely say Vincent Ogay was a reformer. And then that in itself may be a euphemism. Here's why. Okay, he was born around 1755. Now, was he black? Yes. But he was considered what they would call a franchise. So it's basically like a translation to mulatto. He was a person of mixed ancestry. His father was white and his mother was black. And of course, he was born on the Dominican island. More so on the side of Haiti, though. And the city was called Dondon, Dondon. I'm making sure I'm not spelling it incorrectly. That's why I'm taking my time. I'm not looking at nothing. So he's born in Dondon. I believe 1755. His father owned a coffee plantation. His mother later on became like a contractor, to where she'll contract meat to the town or whatnot to butchers within the town. And they had a pretty rich existence, and they were well educated or whatnot. Now, as far as like the population at the time, it was about 556,000 people, I believe, that inhabited it. And 356,000 people. Or was it 500? Nah, I'm going to say 556,000 people. 32,000 of those individuals were white. 24,000 were mulattoes, or those who are called a franchise. The other 500,000 were black West Africans. Now, even though he came from a privileged background, he still couldn't vote. If you were in a franchise, you could not vote. That was something that he later on took issue with. Growing up, he got his education while he was in France, at Bordeaux, France, because he lived with his uncle, one of his uncles, who also had the same name, Vincent Ogay. And he came back to St. Domingo, or the island of St. Domingo, on the side of Haiti. And he didn't like the unfairness that was going on. So he ended up back in France, in Paris to be exact, in 1789. And so he started, this is like during the revolution, by the way. And so he started speaking to colonists about it. And there was another guy named Julian Raymond, I believe. He also had a similar attitude as Quincy. Eventually, they ended up at a meeting. It was an organization called Society of the Friends of the Blacks. It had been in existence since, what year is that? About a year. It wasn't in existence that long. I think only a year before that. I think 1788 also.